For decades, Norma Zimmer appeared to be exactly who America believed she was. Every week, millions watched her step onto television screens with a warm smile, elegant posture, and a voice so pure that it seemed untouched by hardship. As the beloved champagne lady on the Lawrence Welk Show, she represented something increasingly rare in entertainment: stability. No scandals, no public breakdowns, no shocking headlines. At least, that's what people thought. Because hidden beneath the polished image was a far more complicated story. A story of pressure, sacrifice, private struggles, and a woman who spent years balancing two very different realities. One reality belonged to the audience. The other belonged to Norma alone. The strange thing is that the clues were always there. They existed in the choices she made, the opportunities she turned down, and the parts of herself she rarely allowed the public to see. Today, decades after her rise to fame, a clearer picture has emerged, and it raises a troubling question. Did America ever truly know Norma Zimmer at all? Or were millions simply watching a carefully maintained version of the truth? The answer reveals a life far more fascinating and far more human than anyone imagined. By the time Norma Zimmer became a familiar face on television, she had already mastered something that many performers spent a lifetime trying to achieve. She knew how to appear effortless. To viewers, she seemed naturally graceful. Her voice floated through living rooms across America with remarkable consistency. Week after week, she projected calmness and confidence. In an era filled with social change and uncertainty, audiences found comfort in her presence. That comfort became valuable. Television producers understood that viewers formed emotional attachments to familiar personalities. The Lawrence Welk Show was built around that idea. The program offered a carefully curated world where elegance, politeness, and traditional values still appeared untouched by outside conflict. Norma fit perfectly into that formula. But behind every public image exists a private reality. As her popularity grew, expectations followed. Audiences no longer simply enjoyed her performances. They began to view her as a symbol. She represented wholesomeness, stability, faith. The problem with becoming a symbol is that symbols are not allowed to be complicated. Real people struggle. Symbols do not. Real people have doubts. Symbols do not. Real people sometimes break under pressure. Symbols are expected to remain unchanged forever. Without realizing it, Norma found herself trapped inside an image that millions admired. Friends and colleagues often describe her as disciplined and deeply committed. Those traits helped her succeed, but they also made it easier to hide difficulties when they appeared. As years passed, the distance between the public Norma and the private Norma quietly expanded. Few people noticed. Even fewer asked questions. But beneath the polished performances, another story was beginning to unfold. A story that started long before fame ever arrived. An understanding that hidden story requires going back to the beginning. Long before television audiences knew her name, Norma Zimmer understood something that many talented performers eventually learn. Talent opens doors, but it does not control what waits behind them. Growing up, she possessed a remarkable voice. Singing offered possibilities that extended far beyond ordinary expectations. Yet the entertainment industry she entered was governed by unspoken rules, particularly for women. Appearance mattered, behavior mattered, reputation mattered. In many cases, these things mattered almost as much as talent itself. As Norma worked to build her career, she quickly discovered that success often required compromise. Not necessarily moral compromise, but personal compromise. Pieces of herself needed to be carefully managed, adjusted, and sometimes hidden. The entertainment world rewarded consistency. Audiences wanted familiarity. Producers wanted reliability. As opportunities increased, so did expectations. Psychologically, this created an interesting tension. The more successful she became, the more pressure she felt to maintain control. Every public appearance became part of a larger narrative. Every performance reinforced a specific image. Over time, she developed an ability that would define much of her life. Compartmentalization. Public emotions stayed public. private emotions stayed private. The system worked, at least for a while. Colleagues saw professionalism. Audiences saw confidence. Industry executives saw dependability. What they did not always see was the effort required to maintain those perceptions. Like many performers, Norma learned that visibility could be dangerous. Revealing too much of oneself often carried consequences. So she became selective, careful, controlled. Those qualities helped her rise through the industry. But they also created habits that would follow her for decades. Because once someone learns to separate different parts of their identity, the separation can become difficult to reverse. And when national television eventually transformed her into a household name, those hidden divisions would become even more important. Perhaps too important. When Norma Zimmer joined the Lawrence Welk Show, everything changed. The program was already a cultural phenomenon. Millions tuned in every week, drawn to its distinctive blend of music, optimism, and tradition. For Norma, it represented the opportunity of a lifetime. Almost immediately, audiences embraced her. Her elegant appearance, polished stage presence, and exceptional voice made her a natural fit for the show's atmosphere. Before long, she earned the nickname the Champagne Lady, a title that reflected both sophistication and charm. To viewers, she appeared perfectly at home. Yet fame often creates a strange illusion. The more visible someone becomes, the less visible certain parts of them actually are. Public attention tends to simplify people. Complex human beings become recognizable characters. Nuance disappears. Contradictions fade. Norma was no exception. As her popularity expanded, so did the public's perception of who she was. Fans began seeing her less as an individual and more as a representation of specific values. Faith, grace, purity, reliability. The image became powerful, but maintaining it required constant effort. Behind the scenes, life continued to present challenges. Responsibilities did not disappear simply because television cameras were present. Personal concerns remained. Emotional struggles remained. The difference was that audiences rarely witnessed them. Psychologists often describe this phenomenon as role identification, the process by which public figures become deeply associated with the roles they perform. Over time, expectations become difficult to escape. The public wants the character, not necessarily the person. For Norma, this dynamic became increasingly significant as the years passed. Because while viewers celebrated the woman they thought they knew, another version of Norma continued to exist outside the spotlight. A version that faced pressures, fears, and questions that never appeared on television. And eventually, those hidden realities would become impossible to ignore. The question was not whether the two worlds would collide. The question was when. As Norma Zimmer's career continued to flourish, the image America adored became stronger than ever. By all appearances, she had achieved something close to the ideal life. She was respected, admired, and surrounded by professional success. Yet appearances can be deceptive, especially in entertainment. The audience only saw the finished performance. They never saw the emotional cost. Like many performers of her generation, Norma lived under constant pressure to maintain consistency. Every public appearance reinforced expectations. Every television broadcast reminded viewers of who they believed she was. But real life rarely cooperates with public expectations. Away from the cameras, Norma carried the same burdens that countless others experienced. Family responsibilities, personal disappointments, moments of uncertainty, and the ordinary struggles of everyday life continued to exist. The difference was that she rarely spoke about them publicly. That silence became part of her identity. Friends often observed that she possessed remarkable self-discipline. When difficulties appeared, she focused on responsibilities rather than emotions. She kept moving forward. She fulfilled commitments. She showed up when people expected her to show up. From the outside, this looked like strength, and in many ways it was. But there is another side to emotional control. When feelings are constantly managed, hidden, or postponed, they do not disappear. They simply move deeper beneath the surface. For years, Norma mastered the art of separating private struggles from public duties. The audience saw confidence. The people closest to her occasionally saw exhaustion. The audience heard beautiful music. The people closest to her sometimes witnessed sacrifice. This hidden balancing act became one of the defining features of her life. The public celebrated symbol. Meanwhile, the woman behind that symbol carried burdens that few people fully understood. And as time passed, another side of Norma's identity quietly grew stronger, a side that had little to do with television fame, a side that would ultimately reveal why her story was far more complicated than it appeared. If audiences knew Norma Zimmer as a television performer, those closest to her often knew a different version, not a contradictory version, a deeper one. Throughout her life, faith played a central role in shaping how she viewed success, hardship, and personal purpose. While television brought recognition and admiration, it was never the only thing that defined her. In many ways, this is where the idea of her double life begins to make sense. One world revolved around performance. The other revolved around reflection. One required visibility. The other encouraged humility. The contrast was striking. Entertainment rewards attention. Faith often encourages people to look inward rather than outward. Balancing those two realities required constant adjustment. Norma appeared to understand this better than most. As her public profile grew, she became increasingly aware that fame could create a distorted picture of reality. Audiences often assumed they knew public figures personally simply because they saw them regularly on television. But familiarity is not the same as understanding. The private Norma spent significant time focused on values that had little connection to celebrity culture. She invested energy into spiritual growth, family relationships, and personal reflection. These activities rarely generated headlines. They rarely attracted publicity. And perhaps that was exactly the point. While viewers associated her with glamour and entertainment, another part of her life remained intentionally protected from public attention. This private world provided stability during difficult periods. It gave her a sense of identity that existed independently of ratings, applause, or public approval. Yet maintaining two separate worlds was not always easy. The more successful she became, the harder it became to prevent one identity from overshadowing the other. Questions began to emerge. Was she primarily a performer? A woman of faith? A public figure? A private individual? The answer was more complicated than any single label. And as the years moved forward, that complexity would become increasingly difficult to ignore. Because fame has a way of demanding complete loyalty. And Norma was beginning to realize that some parts of herself could never fully belong to the public. And what emerged was not a scandalous secret. It was something far more revealing. A portrait of a woman who had quietly balanced two worlds for most of her life. One public, one deeply personal. And perhaps that balance was her greatest achievement of all. Today, Norma Zimmer's legacy extends far beyond music or television. Her story has become a reminder of how easily public narratives can simplify real people. Looking back, it is tempting to focus exclusively on her success. The television appearances, the popularity, the recognition she earned through years of dedication and talent. Those accomplishments certainly matter, but they tell only part of the story. The deeper lesson lies in what existed behind the spotlight. Norma spent much of her life navigating competing expectations. She learned how to fulfill public responsibilities while protecting private values. She found ways to remain visible without allowing fame to completely define her identity. That balance required resilience. It required self-awareness. And perhaps most importantly, it required a willingness to accept that not everyone would fully understand her. The audience saw elegance. They saw confidence. They saw certainty. Yet beneath those qualities was a woman confronting many of the same questions that challenge ordinary people. Who am I beyond my work? What truly matters? How much of myself should I share with the world? These questions followed her throughout her life. In the end, her story is not about exposing hidden scandals or uncovering shocking secrets. It is about discovering the humanity hidden behind a public image. The smiling performer was real. The reflective, private woman was real too. Together, they form a more complete portrait of Norma Zimmer than audiences ever received during her years on television. And perhaps that is the final mystery her life leaves behind. How many other public figures are remembered as symbols rather than people? How many stories remain incomplete because audiences only saw what happened under the lights? Norma Zimmer's life offers no easy answers. Instead, it leaves viewers with something more valuable. A reason to look beyond appearances. A reason to question simple narratives. And a reminder that the most fascinating truths are often hiding where everyone can see them, but almost nobody looks.